And let's talk a little bit about rehabilitative pruning. In the business of arboriculture, it is called crown restoration. And that's what you do if somebody's already screwed up the tree. We're not going to say who, we're not going to point any fingers. But if somebody you know has topped, tipped, stripped their tree, and now it's a mess of water sprouts, the news is good. Probably 2/3 of the trees that have been malpruned can be grown out of it and go on to lead normal, useful lives. This is what your tree looks like after it's been topped. This is what it looks like 15 minutes later. This is what it looks like about 5 years later. And at this point, this tree looked like the letter Y when it had been topped. And now it has grown for 5 years, and notice that some of the water sprouts are fattening up and turning into branches. It is at this point I would go in and sort of clean up the peach fuzz down there at the top of the letter Y and try to make it a cleaner tree. And this is what it would look like after it has been worked on. Notice that the water sprouts are actually starting to curve, put on side branches. And in the future, this tree will be more attractive even than it's still suffering a little of the ill effects of having been topped. But you can tell it's actually, they're not really water sprouts anymore. They're actually turning back into branches. And I should mention that when you do crown restoration on trees, and you can do that on any size tree, it matters how big it is. And the reason is that these new branches may or may not be weakly attached, and the trunk may or may not be rotten from the topping cut. So if this is a big leaf maple perched over the baby's room, you're going to have your ISA certified arborist do a risk assessment and find out whether or not it's too dangerous to continue and needs to come out. If it is, in fact, an ornamental tree, like this one is, it's too small to do any damage when it falls apart. It's really not going to hurt much of anything. And so you can afford to keep it the way it is. And now we are to the most important illustration in this slideshow. It has absolutely nothing to do with pruning. It has to do with where the tree roots are. Most people imagine that the tree roots look like something on the left, a mirror of the crown, that they go deep and as wide as the drip line, but no farther. This is an inaccurate picture. It's a picture that's on everybody's labels in all the storybooks. I have like a whole box of literature that shows the incorrect illustration of where a tree's roots are. A tree's roots actually look more like the picture on the right. Most of the anchoring roots are in the top 3 feet of soil, and the absorbing roots, the ones that take up nutrients and water, are in the top 3 inches. And they extend twice the height of the tree, far out from the drip line. So you don't want to think of a barbell. You want to think of a goblet sitting on a plate when you think of how a tree's roots are. And why it matters is that we are forever inadvertently killing our trees by destroying the root system. Unfortunately, it takes between 3 and 7 years for a tree to die after you've destroyed its root system. And you can easily do that, notice the piece of power equipment there, by trenching, cutting and filling, by adding 4 inches of soil over the roots, by cutting 5 inches down, by putting in irrigation lines that slice through all the roots, by compacting the soil, by driving all over it in the rain while you're working on your house, or by building a patio around your tree. Those roots really need air pockets and not to be dealt with harshly. So start to think about where your tree's roots really are. Here's an example of that box full of literature I have. My niece drew this. It was up on the refrigerator, and I said, "Can I have that?" It's an example of exactly what's wrong with the education system. This is a compactor. This kills a lot of tree roots by squishing out every air pocket available. And your tree will start to look like this after a few years. The tips will start to die back. This is a sign. This is a sign that your tree is dying from something you did to it. And you can get a tree that looks as sick as this by building around it. And you need an arborist to come take a look at it and do what's called a risk assessment. Risk assessment. It's not a well-developed science, but we're working on it. Arborists see things that you don't with regards to how risky your tree is. It used to be called hazard tree evaluation, but now we call it tree risk assessment. The lawyers got involved. And they can help you determine whether or not the tree that you have next to your house poses a risk. And they look at things that we don't look at. Trees don't go over because they're too big. They go over because they have a root rot or a trunk rot or a top rot. They have names for all these. You might have some foamy zoonosis or perhaps some armillaria. How would you know? You wouldn't. You would have an arborist come in and try and prevent a situation like this. They're looking for things like included bark. They're looking for mushrooms on your trunks. They're looking for recent construction, and you want to pay them for what they know. Get an ISA certified arborist who's been in the business for a long time. It's best if you can get one who's picked up after a lot of storms. And sometimes trees are just in the wrong place. They're in saturated soils in a big wind, or they have a root rot. Around here in the Pacific Northwest, we have more root rots than anything because we have such a lovely damp weather. And then there are certain species that are just prone to breakage. Cottonwoods will do this. They go to age 75 and then start busting out tops. So we do actually do profiles on trees as to how they're most likely to fail. A tree cannot be a high-risk tree if there is no target. If your tree sits out in the backyard or down over the bluff, it cannot be a risky tree because when the storm comes, you're going to be inside. So the first thing that arborists look for is the target. The next thing they look for is the most likely point of failure. That would be blowdown, the whole tree falls, the tree snaps in half, or a limb or a top breaks out. And then they determine how much damage that thing will cause, which is to say how heavy it is. So you can have a rotten, buggy little tree in the backyard and it's not going to do much damage. But if you have a giant tree with a defect over the baby's room in a wind tunnel, you need to be concerned. Edge trees are particularly prone to falling down. This happens in new developments in the woods. People carve out a corner of the woods, and the trees on the edge grew up with no wind stress. Trees grown in the open are used to the wind that they feel all over, and they put on just enough trunk and just enough roots to hold themselves up. But trees in the middle of the woods don't feel any windstorms. Only the edges of the forest feel the storm and the very top. So they tend to be tall and skinny without much taper. And when you carve off all their buddies, they suddenly are exposed to all these heavy winds that they're not prepared to meet, and they fall over. This is called a release tree or an edge tree, and it's a very difficult situation, which is to say, I'm not sure there's much cure for it. If your tree grew out in the open with sunlight and wind all the way around, it's a much sturdier tree. Also, your arborist will be looking at the trunk, or in this case, the trunk flare. Notice that this tree has a circling, girdling root, and even 50 years later, this can cause your tree to fail. It happens because of bad nursery practices and bad planting practices, and it is one of the defects that arborists look for. They also look for signs of mushrooms near the base of your tree or on the trunk of your tree can indicate rot on the inside. Not all mushrooms indicate a dangerous tree, but some do. I can't identify them. I know just enough to scare the heck out of people. And when I see something like this, I say, you ought to get your arborist to come look at this. And by arborists, I mean your ISA certified arborists. I'm an ISA certified arborist. I have the white card in my wallet. So do be careful when you're hiring somebody. There are a lot of well-meaning, nice people, but you want somebody that has some education. They'll have like a little toolkit to check to see how risky your tree might be. And we'll write you a nice report for a nice sum of money. And your other arborists, sometimes consulting arborists never do any tree work. They just do assessments. And a lot of your working arborists do both. And your working arborists or your climbers can also do the pruning and cabling that may be necessary. And once you understand trees and learn how to deal with them correctly, they can live happily ever after. And you can think of them as your friends and representatives of the nature that we should all respect and find encouragement from. This slideshow has been brought to you by Plant Amnesty, the only nonprofit to end bad pruning. We're here to help. You can check out our website. You can give us a call. You can send us an email. Oh, and you can also buy my book, Cass Turnbull's Guide to Pruning. Thanks for listening.